This is the meeting of March 5th. We'll note that Commissioner Steiner is absent. All other commissioners are present. Also, City Attorney Coling is away on assignment, and sitting in for him is Becky Weldon from Ebeltoft-Stickler, and so we'll welcome Ms. Weldon. And the first item of business then is the order of business. Are there any changes or additions to the order of business?
I'll move we approve the agenda.
Second.
We have the motion and the second to approve the order of business. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. The motion carries. Second item then is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda you wish to discuss? There's no discussion. Would there be a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. We'll proceed to vote. Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Ullman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. We'll go to tab 4. And the first item there to consider is an addendum to a city land sale. And Ms. Weldon, are you prepared to introduce that item?
Yes, Mr. President, I am. This is a proposed addendum to the purchase agreement that was requested by Dickinson Energy. The addendum concerns the amount of title insurance that Dickinson Energy will provide to the city for the parcels that the city is purchasing. The addendum makes clear that the total amount of title insurance Dickinson Energy Park is responsible for is in the amount of $871,200, but they are not required to provide two separate policies. Attorney Coling has reviewed the addendum and recommends approval. The purchase agreement for this real estate transaction was approved by the City Commission on February 6th. It's been signed by all parties, and now we are awaiting the final title work and anticipate being able to close on March 15th.
Thank you for that introduction. Are there any comments or questions for the city attorney? Mr. Kessel, is there anything you'd want to add?
Thank you, President Johnson. Just as a reminder, this is the land deal that included the swap for the 45 acres the city had. We're using 25 of that for the Public Works building, and then acquiring another site for the Public Safety Center as a potential site of the Public Safety Center. So just a reminder of the other portions of that deal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kessel. To get things rolling, would there be a motion regarding this addendum?
I'll move we approve the addendum.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion now? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Oldman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Brings us to item B. This is a proposed ordinance regarding the DUI blood alcohol level. And Ms. Weldon, do you have an ordinance number on this one?
Mr. President, it would be 1453.
1453? Okay. Chief Dossinger, is this an ordinance that you're introducing? Or, well, you don't have to. If you don't, we can make you Captain Dossinger again, I guess, but but other than that.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the Commission. Basically, what this allows us, it brings our current city ordinance into compliance with the North Dakota Century Code. The biggest change on that, the way that our ordinance was written, would be a .10 as far as the blood alcohol level, and it would be moved to a .08. Those would be the biggest change, and make it consistent with the North Dakota Century Code.
Okay. Attorney Weldon, do you concur with his introduction?
I do.
You do, okay. Anybody else care to comment here or questions by the commissioners? This is first reading. If there's anyone from the public that would like to comment regarding this proposed ordinance, you may do so now. Just come to the podium and state your name. We'd hear your comments. Anybody from the public? No one from the public? Again, any comments by commissioners? Is there a motion regarding first reading?
So moved.
Second.
We have the motion to approve first reading and second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Chief. Well, that brings us to reports. Mr. Kessel?
Thank you, President Johnson, Commissioners. The first item is a property value notice, and I have a nice little memo here that City Assessor Joe Hirschfeld wrote that I'd like to share with the Commission pertaining to this item. Mr. Hirschfeld is in the audience as well. Via North Dakota Century Code, we are required to send out notices to the property owners if their property has increased in value by either one of two measures. The first measure is if that increase has gone up 10% or more based on the previous year's valuation, and the second is if their total valuation has gone up over $3,000. And if either of those have been satisfied, then we have to mail out a formal notice. We have about 9,600 parcels of land inside the city limits of Dickinson, and we'll be sending out approximately 4,000 notices this year. It's a big number. It's about 40%, a little over 40% of all the total parcels, but I'd like to break that down a little bit so we all understand exactly why so many will be sent out this year. About 36% of the notices will be residential in nature, and land is the biggest increase, or the reason for these, for the majority of these increases. Land prices in Dickinson have gone up tremendously. Our assessing reflects what happens in the marketplace, and certainly this is a function of that reflection. 85% is the average increase in vacant land, residentially vacant land. The nice thing about vacant land is the taxation is rather low, comparatively speaking. And I'd also like to make a distinction between taxation and valuation. Certainly there is an influence. If your property values go up, that may mean a taxation increase, but there is not a direct link. Just because valuation goes up does not mean that there is a property tax increase. Commercially, there's about 85% of the almost 700 commercial parcels, 85% of them will be receiving a notice. The average increase on a commercial property is about 15%. On commercial vacant lands, they'll be receiving an average increase of 87.5% on those commercially vacant lands. That's the largest increase, and by far a reflection, again, of what's happening in our marketplace. And then on the apartment side, 99% of the property that has apartment dwellings on them are receiving an increase, and that average increase is about 15.5%. So that's why. I also want to point out that about 14% of total parcels, or about 1,300 of them, actually will be declining in 2012. The reason for those declines, for the most part, are due to internal assessment reasons. Some of them are due to the removal of structures, property that once had a building on it and no longer does, and the addition of exemptions that maybe weren't included last year, but they are included this year on that property. And then the last thing that I'd like to mention is because of all the new construction that's happening in our community, property valuations are estimated to increase about $166 million, or about 16%, just based on the new construction that's going on in the city of Dickinson. And if I remember right, last year was the first year that the city went over the $1 billion appraisal limit. So that was a important milestone for the community. So I guess with that, I'd like to take any questions that the commission may have. We wanted to make sure that this announcement kind of precedes anything that will arrive in the mail. there are no questions, I'll go on to the second item, which is an armory
Russell.
update. Oh,
I'd be interested in getting a copy of that memo.
Sure,
Could we each
I'll-
get a copy of that?
yep, I'll make a copy for everybody.
Thank you.
In fact, we may be able to post it on our website. I think it's got a lot of useful information in it, and we can put that on the website so everybody can see it. If there's no further questions, the next item then is an armory update. I went over to the armory today. They are very, very close to finishing this project. There's some outside painting that needs to be done and a few little odds and ends inside, but essentially this project is done. We should be doing the walkthrough either this week or early next week, assuming that the weather holds and they can get that outside painting done. I did visit with some of the staff that's at the armory, the National Guard staff, and they were very pleased with Martins Brenny as a firm and the professionalism that they exercised while completing this work. So I wanted to pass that along to the commission. And the next item is a transit building update. The transit building is a structure that we built in cooperation with the state of North Dakota. We used funds from the federal government, stimulus dollars actually, to do most of the construction. The elder care or public transit is now occupying that building. They have a temporary certificate of occupancy. The reason it's temporary is there are some things that are attached to that project that aren't complete yet and won't be able to be completed until the weather allows, and most of that is landscaping issues. So as soon as the weather allows the landscaping to complete, that project will be considered complete. I also visited that building several times throughout its construction, and the new elder care crew is very pleased with their structure. So I do have a couple other updates I can provide the City Commission that aren't on the agenda, just quickly. The first is the Public Works Building. This is a structure that we've been talking about for a few years already. It is currently under design. Hulsing is doing that design. We've met several times with Hulsing and selected staff. All of the Public Works staff have been involved in creating or providing input into the structure and to the site itself. I actually have a meeting tomorrow where we're going to go over the budget for this building and make sure that it falls within our budget framework. So we're excited about getting that completed, that design completed, and going to bid hopefully within the next month or two. And the last item that I'd like to update the commission on is we mentioned at a previous city commission meeting that we have land on the southeast side of town that we're interested in putting out for bid. I've started to construct that actual bid and wanted to just make sure that the city commission is still okay with that property, or a portion of that 160 acres actually be put out to bid, and in return, the city of Dickinson would have the opportunity to choose the development and the master plan that best fits that area and one of the goals is to have affordable housing be constructed. It's certainly a need that the city has identified and one that we can assist with, so.
Are you putting it out for bids, or are you putting it out for, like, requests for proposals on how to develop the land?
According to Attorney Coling, he's not comfortable with an RFP. He'd like to see us do it. We can accomplish almost the exact same thing with a bid. So he's more comfortable using the bid process. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Certainly, once I'm complete writing the document, I'll forward that on to the city attorney's office. They can do their review as well. But I hope to have a written copy at our next commission meeting for you to review.
The parcel would be bid as it's currently zoned, which I assume is ag?
Yes, we have some options there, of course, because we fully anticipate an R3 request, and in order to achieve some of the affordable housing goals we anticipate that there'll be a mix of R1, R2, and R3.
I'm just trying to envision where we might go as the seller, and then giving scrutiny to a requested rezoning situation.
Yeah, the other option, of course, is to rezone it ourselves and then sell it with the zoning intact. That may limit the creativity that bidders would provide, but
I just think we need to make it sure when we do let it for bids that it doesn't mean any guarantee about a certain rezoning or...
Mhm. Or we could limit the number of acres that we would allow in certain zoning. There's going to be approximately between 90 and 100 acres that we'd be comfortable with letting sail. There's, of course, some reservations we want to make for city purposes, so not all the land would be up for bid. I'm certainly open to suggestions on how to, because that will make a difference in the price that people are willing to pay. Is if we guarantee an R3 on a 90 acres, we'll get a lot higher bids than if it's an R1 property, is my assumption. We can certainly talk later. This is a subject that we can certainly speak about later to get some good ideas from the commission specifically.
Mr. Kessel, going back to the Public Works building, still our intention to have the animal shelter attached to that as they're drawing up the preliminary plans?
Commissioner Oltman's, I'm not sure attached is the right word, but if you meant buildings being attached, but certainly the project will be attached to this, yes. That is part of the discussion that I'll have with Hulsing tomorrow, is that we would like to have the animal shelter bid as an alternate as part of this project.
Okay.
That would conclude my report this evening, unless there's further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. We'll move to tab 6. This is Public Works and Planning, and the first item there is possible second reading and passage of ordinance 1452, and Mr. Cretan, I think this is your item.
That's correct, Mr. President. Commissioners, this is a correction of the legal description for a piece of property that's already been rezoned from R1 to community commercial on the northeast corner of 15th and State Avenue. Part of the legal description was incorrect, so this is a clarification for that. There has been no changes from the first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Cretan. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment regarding this proposed ordinance? If so, step to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. There's no one from the public. Any comments or questions by city commissioners? Would there be a motion regarding ordinance 1452?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. The next two items, B and C, are removed from the agenda. Mr. Cretan, do you wish to comment, or should I just move on?
The applicant chose to, I could just quickly comment on, Mr. President. The applicant chose to withdraw the development agreement. They wanted to have some additional time to look at the corrections before they signed it. Staff is fine with that. We want to make sure that all parties are in agreement before they move forward. So I would anticipate on our next agenda item that we'll have both the final plat and the development agreement for Cook Meadow Hills.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cretan. Items D through G are the city engineers, so Mr. Soren will let you take us through those next four items then.
Thank you, President Johnson, City Commissioners. The first item I have is our 2012 street improvement projects. This is the city's annual mill and overlay project that we're working on here. In the past few years, we spent a lot of time in the central part of town, west of Highway 22, towards State Avenue with 1st and 2nd. Most of those have been on the streets. This project is picking up the avenues in that area that we haven't done around the college, south of the college. as well as Alexander Drive, which is east of 10th Avenue East and just south of the interstate, which is a road that just has had a lot of new home constructed on it and is completed now, so we're getting that taken care of. The bid for this project, we had one bidder for it, Northern Improvement, with a bid of $810,780, which is about $70,000 below what we had estimated the project to be. And with that, we're recommending that we award the 2012 street improvement project to Northern Improvement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Soren. You've heard the city engineer's report. Any comments or questions regarding this item? Not, is there a motion regarding his recommendation?
I'll move we award the 2012 project to Northern Improvement.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel? Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. You can continue, Mr. Soren.
The next item I have is our 2012 Urban Roads Program, which is 10th Avenue East from Bullard north to the Interstate Bridge. This is a mill and overlay project and was bid in February by the DOT. It also only had one bidder, Northern Improvement, with a bid of $711,700. That is also below the engineer's estimate by approximately $70,000 as well. We are recommending that we award this project to Northern Improvement in the amount of $711,700. This is an 80-20 federal match. We have the 20% matching on that, so our share of this project's $150,000 approximately, plus design and construction engineering.
Thank you, Mr. Soren. You've heard his report and recommendations. Are there any comments or questions? Not, would there be a motion regarding his recommendation?
Motion to approve.
We have the motion to approve the recommendation and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel? Aye. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
The next item is a continuation of our water main replacement program that we started 2 years ago. This is phase 1 of 2 that we expect to do this year. The second one's coming later because we're working with the railroad on some permits for crossing. But this project, we did have several bidders on it, I think 7, if I remember right, with Guam Construction being the low bid at $789,000. The engineer's estimate for this project was $869,000, so we came in below the engineer's estimate on this one as well. We're recommending that we award this project to Guam Construction.
Thank you, Mr. Soren. You've heard his report and recommendation. Are there any comments or questions? Is there a motion regarding his recommendation?
Move the approval of the Guam bid.
I'll second.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Soren. That brings us to item H.
Mr. President, I have one more.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The last item I have is the cost participation and maintenance agreement for the Highway 22 project from where the current 5-lane section ends north to the county line. This agreement does state, like all regional projects, urban road projects that we do with the DOT, that we'll take over the maintenance of all the signals and the street right-of-ways for this project. It is from just to the city limits. It doesn't go all the way to the county line, though. If the city limits were to move, the agreement would go with that, and we'd take on that maintenance responsibility. This project is an $11 million project, but it is a federal-state project. There is no city funds allocated for this project. So I'm recommending that we approve the cost participation and maintenance agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Soren. You've heard his report and recommendation. Any comments or questions? Would there be a motion regarding his recommendation?
I'll move that we approve the maintenance agreement.
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Anything else, Mr. Soren?
That's all I have, President.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to item H. This is first reading of an ordinance regarding corridor overlay district. And Ms. Weldon, it's ordinance number what?
Mr. President, it would be ordinance number 1454.
1454. And who's making the introduction? Is this Mr.?
Mr. President, I'll make the introduction if
Okay,
that
thank you.
works for you. This ordinance came out of discussions with city staff and the Planning Commission with respect to potential land uses from rezonings along the major roads within the city, especially Highway 22 up north. Rather than recommending denial on heavy commercial or industrial developments, as the Commission's aware of, you cannot put conditions on a rezone. The Planning Commission directed staff to work on an ordinance to address land uses and address building and site design in order to protect and enhance the properties along our major roads that lead in the city and also in our extraterritorial zone. This ordinance is a culmination of several months of work with the Planning Commission and city staff. I'll summarize the main sections of the ordinance. As I mentioned, that this ordinance applies to all properties within 300 feet of our major roads within Dickinson and the extraterritorial zone. The intent of this is to enhance the standards for building, landscaping, and other improvements on those properties within our transportation corridors, and to encourage high-quality design to promote quality, scale, and character of development within our major roadways. The roadways that are affected are Highway 22, I-94 highway corridor, which would be the back sides of I-94 as it proceeds through the city, Villard, I-94 business loop, both the east and west side, State Avenue, 10th Avenue East, 21st Street, both east and the west sides, and 34th Street southwest and 40th Street east. This ordinance does not change any zoning that is already established. This is an overlay district that would apply over the base zoning. So the zoning would stay the same. It's just that this would provide additional design standards and design requirements for development. On the second page, it describes the applicability of the ordinance. This ordinance applies to expansions of buildings that exceed 50% or greater. Essentially, we're talking about major expansions or new development or new construction. Under building design, the intent of this ordinance is to remove the standard industrial, commercial and industrial metal buildings that you see that are pretty prolific in some of the older sections of our town and along our industrial districts that are fronting along our major corridors. This ordinance would require the facade or front facade that faces our commercial and industrial districts that face the road to have at least a minimum of 50% of additional materials in addition to a basic metal facade. And we have an extensive list in which a developer or property owner could choose from, and I'll just quickly run through some of those. Clay and masonry brick, customized concrete masonry, poured in place, tilt-up or precast concrete, architectural flat metal, stucco, natural stone, and residential permanent siding. So this allows a lot of flexibility. We're not trying to, this ordinance is not trying to dictate or specify that you have to build within certain bounds. We're allowing a great variety in order for people to choose from. And there is a provision in which additional materials that are not specified can be submitted to the city planner for review to make sure that it falls within the intent of the ordinance. Additional requirements, ground floor building facades for commercial and office buildings must have a minimum of 20% glass windows. What we're trying to do here is remove the wall or the box appearance to have some articulation with either windows or breaking up the massing effect of it. Any portion of the building facade that exceeds 100 feet shall incorporate windows or architectural design elements to break up the expanse of the wall. Building entrances, we're trying to emphasize that building entrances into your site and also into the building itself should be accentuated with either canopies or overhangs or peak roofs. What we're trying to go from is a basic standard to more of an aesthetically pleasing standard that would be beneficial for not just the developer but also for surrounding properties. Roof-mounted and ground-mounted mechanical equipment shall be fully screened to remove that visual appearance. Freestanding garage clusters in multifamily residential sites shall have appearance similar to the residential building. This would be similar to what Roars did. In their apartments, they made their linear garages that front up against the roads similar in material and design of what their apartments were. And I thought that was a nice mix, instead of just having a basic garage appearance to that. Buildings at major intersections that are classified as arterials or greater would be required to have the parking on the rear side. What we're trying to do is push buildings up in our major intersections so that the building and landscaping is what you see, and then the parking's reversed on the back side. Trash enclosures and trash compactors shall not be visible along the corridor. This is an aesthetic issue, and in which we'll try to push those elements that on the back sides of the buildings instead of up front that you see in a lot of the developments that we have. Outside storage that does not consist of display of materials should be located on the opposite side of the building. And loading and delivery areas shall not be located along the front or side of the building. These elements would make it more of a commercial appearance instead of more of an industrial appearance. Contractor service yards and heavy equipment and salvage uses shall be located away from the public frontages and shall be screened with opaque fencing. This is something that I think is desperately needed in some of our areas in the city, in which we have a lot of existing uses that have existing cars or building materials that are in the front that reduce the property values for adjacent users. This would require them to have opaque fencing in order for them to screen that. Pedestrian walkways, some of our larger commercial projects that we may be seeing in the next year or two, instead of a pedestrian or a person driving a car having to walk through the drive aisle on larger developments, they'll need to have a designated walkway from the parking lot going into the buildings. This will provide for a safe walking environment on these bigger developments that we have. And then pedestrian scale lighting in order to be consistent with the pedestrian activity. There also is the administration of this. Whenever a commercial or residential or industrial project comes in, as the administrator of that, they would submit their building plans. I would look at it with respect to the intent of this ordinance and either approve it or deny that. There is an appeal process for it. If they don't agree with an interpretation from me, they could appeal it to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission could take action on that appeal, and if an applicant and if a developer or property owner is not satisfied with that, they could appeal it directly to the City Commission. We will need to set up a city fee schedule for the appeal process, and I'll be working on that shortly after the second reading of that. And with that, I could answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Creton. Any comments or questions for the city planner?
Mr. President, I'd just like to add that Planning and Zoning looked at this for, I think, 3-4 months, I believe, fine-tuning it before recommending it to the city. It came with a unanimous vote, and it's something that I think Planning and Zoning was pretty passionate about, as a tool to really preserve our gateways and our main thoroughfares these next few years as we see the growth that we all know we're going to see. I think it's going to be a great tool. If we need to fine tune it in the future, we can, but I think it's a great start and something that's going to really keep our city looking the way we want it to look as we go through this fast growth period. There's one change I'd like to suggest.
Okay.
One word, and that's on page 2, where we list the different streets. Number 8, I think we need to take off the word east at the end of number 8.
40th Street.
It should be all the way across, should it not? If it's 40th Street East, that means it's just east of Sims. Right?
I will take it off. For clarification, yes. I believe so. What I was trying to do is that I was looking at Highway 22, and to the west of Highway 22 is 34th Street Southwest, because it's still technically county, and then the other one I put east, but yes, so I'll just remove east for clarification purposes.
Okay. Well, this is ordinance number 1454. We're considering the first reading tonight. I would invite anyone from the public who would like to comment regarding this ordinance to do so now. Just come to the podium, state your name, we'll hear your comments. There's no one that wishes to comment. Would there be a motion regarding first reading?
Mr. President, I'll move that we approve the first reading of ordinance 1454, right?
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel? Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. Okay, we have a couple of timetable items we'll go to. At 5 o'clock, we have a public hearing. This is a rezoning petition, and it is consideration of first reading then of an ordinance, and is this 1455?
It is, Mr. President.
Okay. I'm a fast learner. Okay, and Mr. Curtin, I think this is your item also?
Yes, Mr. President. This is a rezone petition request from R2 to R3 for lots 1 through 21, Block 4, Country Oaks Estates, Second Edition. The site is located northerly of the Century Apartments and westerly of 10th Avenue West. The Planning and Zoning Commission and city staff recommend approval.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Curtin. This is consideration to approve first reading of 1455. If there's anyone from the public that would like to comment, you may do so. Come to the podium, state your name, we'll hear your comments. There's no one from the public that wishes to comment. Any comments or questions by city commissioners? Is there a motion then regarding first reading here?
Motion to approve?
I'll second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. The second timetable item then is a public hearing. This is a hearing regarding a design policy change related to park dedications and new plats. This is ordinance number 1451. We passed first reading at the prior meeting. At this time, I would declare the public hearing open. Anyone who wishes to comment regarding this proposed ordinance may do so now. Just come to the podium, state your name, we'll hear your comments. Anybody from the public? There's no one from the public, so we'll declare the public hearing closed. And Mr. Kessel, I can't remember, did we put this on just then for the public hearing and we'll act on second reading on the, at the next city commission meeting, or?
That was your original intent.
Okay,
Yeah, it was your stated intent from, as a body, yes.
all right. Mr. Kramer, I see you're in the audience. If we act on this 2 weeks from now, is that going to meet your needs? Okay, well, we'll place it on the agenda then for action at our next meeting. Well, with that, that completes the agenda. Are there any items from city commissioners? If not, is there anyone from the public that would like to address the commission? If so, just come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anybody from the public? There's no one from the public, so the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Before the adjournment, I just wanted to clarify the joint planning commission meeting with the city commission and planning commission for the 14th from 3 to 5. Would there be a consensus from the commissioners that you'll be able to attend that is in a sufficient time?
It's on my calendar.
It's on mine.
Mine too. So, okay. Will KLJ be there again?
Yes, they wanted to, I told them that tonight we would be confirming that meeting date and time so that they can get their application, so they can get all the materials ready for the meeting. So that's
Okay.
why I wanted to confirm that with you
Oh,
tonight.
great. Is there anything else? I can't remember. Did I get a motion to adjourn, or?
I'll move we adjourn.
All right, is there? a
I'll second.
We have the motion and the second. All in favor of adjourning, say